since I've been at University of Virginia, I've been really impressed with the support all the teams get in general.
I think there are times that we have great fan support, not only from our students, but also from the general population here in the region.
I've been to a couple soccer games, a lot of basketball games, women's and men's basketball. And definitely the ones that I've been to have been, pretty well attended. I know UVA fans get pretty rowdy about a lot of things, but I mean, I don't know. Nothing's like when the fans storm the field after a game, after a football game. So that's still the best.
I have, especially for the women's basketball team, because, they usually do have a great turnout, but I would like to see some of my friends and a lot of the students come to those games. Because
I think specific to our sport, soccer, this is, to me, a soccer town, and we're fortunate to be a part of a community that I think there's a nice town and gown relationship here. And so I think our crowds have, annually been in the top 10 to 20 of the crowds for women's soccer nationally. So we feel pretty lucky in that regard. They're very supportive, and they're very knowledgeable about the sport. And so specifically to our sport, have been pleased. Would I like to have more? Would I like to continue to see it grow? Yes. Has it grown? Yes. But I think overall it's been very, very supportive of our program.
Trading baskets with the Lancers. They lob for Egwu, wide open on the left baseline, and she lays it in with the left hand.
Winsky with the ball now, rotates it around the horn, far side left is Joe Harris slinging one to the elbow. KT Harrell pull up jumper, no good. The side shot with a rebound, though. He'll clean it up.
Yeah, there's probably bigger crowds for the men's games, for whatever reason, but there's definitely still a lot of supporters for the women. There are a lot of people that go to the women's game rather than the men's game. So,
women's soccer team, they usually get around 800 people. Maybe I think one of their high game was 1,200 this year. A lot of them are parents and friends of the team. It's definitely not a high publicity sport, but I've seen the crowds get rowdy. It can get loud. I know that men's soccer, I've done men's soccer games, they probably get double the crowd. But at Klockner, you can get loud with a pretty small crowd.
Well, I think we've been around maybe a little over 2,000, right around 2,000 as the biggest crowds. We've had some bigger crowds when we had double headers with the men, but I think the highest attendance is right around 2,000 for a game.
Because generally the demographics of the crowd are just way different. Generally, a little bit of the older crowd are a family crowd rather than just plain students. And so, although we do affect them, we make them happy, but they don't necessarily show it. But it doesn't mean they don't appreciate the band any less. But it does make an effect on us because it's harder to draw energy from them. We have to rely more on ourselves for that.
The band's effect on crowd morale.
At men's games, since there's a lot more students generally, it's very evident. But at women's games, the band doesn't affect the crowd as much.
I know the ones that are there really care about it, men's or women's sports, and we enjoy playing for both. We don't really have a struggle to get students to play for women's sports or men's sports. It seems to be pretty equal.
Yep. In a women's game, with a smaller crowd, sometimes we seem louder in the place, but with a men's crowd, the crowd seems louder, and it's different. It's almost impossible to compare the two, really.
Right. When the marching band goes and practices in August at band camp, we only get to practice in the stadium one time, and when we go in there, the band is very, very loud, and then you get all those bodies in there, and it soaks up the sound. And that's what happens for men's games. That's why you need a few more band members, a little bigger band. That's the only reason why.
Big sports are basketball and football, and so in fall and winter they usually get priority. As far as the smaller sports, men's and women's, it's pretty even on who gets what position and what priority on the paper. So it's a pretty even spacement. Depending on who they're playing and how good they are, sometimes they'll get different coverage. Stories are placed on who's going to get the most readers, and as far as an associate editor, I don't pick where on the page they go. That depends on the priority of the game. There have been times where the women's soccer teams has been placed ahead of the men's soccer team because men's team is maybe playing a non-conference opponent or someone not as good as if the women's team is playing a rivalry game. So it really all depends on the priority of the actual game.
There's a story that when Sports Illustrated was first getting on its feet, some of the sports writers and the sports editors were talking about, well, you know, we told people to have an interest in that sport. We felt like that was our role as Sports Illustrated sports writers, editors, that we told them which events they should go to see, and we told them which events were important, and that was kind of our job. So the media has a good deal of participation and effect on who sees what events.
I think people gravitate toward the things that they see on TV, the things that they read about, and that dominate the headlines in terms of the media. So in other words, on ESPN and Fox Sports and a lot of other electronic media, and in Sports Illustrated, USA Today, and in the local newspapers,
the women's sports aren't as advertised. They're not necessarily revenue sports. A lot of people go out and turn into an event. Like, it's a big deal to go out and go to a football game. It's kind of like an all-day event. It's an event to go out to a men's basketball game. It's an event to go out to a lacrosse game. But it's not necessarily a big event to go out to a women's volleyball game or a field hockey game. When it definitely could be, but it's just not advertised as one.
Frankly, I don't think our crowds are good enough. I don't think there's as many people coming to watch as there should be. I think the reason why we haven't had as many students as we'd like is not being educated on the sport. I think wrestling is a sport that's not the norm. It's not something people do for fun. When you grow up, you go shoot hoops, you play sandlot baseball, you go throw the football around the front yard with your buddies from down the block. I don't know about you, but I don't know a lot of people that go out front and say, hey man, you want to wrestle live? You want to go hit some double legs for fun? You know, it's not something that people sort of readily understand.
If you look at the wider sports scene, there certainly is a discrepancy in terms of the number of people who attend male sporting events as opposed to female sporting events.
I think that people tend to support men's teams more than women's teams, mostly because of what their peers do, primarily. It's not that common to have people go to games alone, especially as a student. In men's sports, it tends to be more of the pow, boom, and just like the exclamation points on plays. When people go to games, they like to be entertained. And if you like teamwork and really just solid fundamentals and have that be part of your game that you like to watch, then a women's game would be more ideal. However, I feel like a lot of students and a lot of mainstream America prefers like the high action, dunking, huge hits, like action movie-like sort of things. And you're more likely to get that in men's basketball and football and other sports than women's.
I think there's also something else. A lot of people like to watch ESPN, Sports Center, and they talk about men's sports a lot more than women's sports. That's where the narrative is. People can watch them on TV. They can follow them when they go play at away games. You can't really do that with women's sports. So you can keep up with the men's teams a lot better than you can with the women's teams. I think also it might be too much to keep up with if you're doing men's and women's, because if you buy a men's basketball season ticket, that's 16 games. If you buy a women's basketball season ticket, that's another 16 games. That's 32 games. That's a lot of games. Can people afford to do both? Probably not. And if they have to choose between the two, people typically seem to choose the men's teams. Again, because that's where the narrative is. That's where the action plays are, the dunks. Men's basketball uses a bigger ball and a smaller hoop, and just more people show up. It creates a more exciting environment for the fans.
What do you or your department do to get the students out to certain sports?
Well, there's a lot of communication that takes place electronically. There are a number of organizations that support students and connect with the athletics department in terms of getting communication out. The Who Crew, for example, is a student-based organization that has a number of different communications and incentives over the course of an academic year to get students to attend athletic events.
I feel like people around UVA need to be more excited about it. There's not really a general excitement for women's sports, and I think it's the way people look at women's sports. I think people, I guess, are negative to the idea of going to women's sports, and I feel like, I don't know, having a positive connotation with going to events would really, I guess, improve attendance at some of the women's sporting events. In addition to that, usually when there are incentives such as food incentives or shirt incentives, we generally see a lot better attendance at women's events. But I think the general attitude of the student population is the main thing that needs to change in order to, I guess, get better environments at women's sporting events.
The institution of women in women's sports, that's kind of what it's like. It's just, I feel like sports in general are male-dominated. It's okay for women to like sports and watch ESPN, but I mean, men don't go and watch, TLC and a lot of like more female demographic shows. I mean, that's a little bit less common. So I think that plays a role in sports too.
It's a celebration of masculinity. Yep, absolutely. Sure. Well, I think that sport is seen as an inherently masculine domain. And so when males participate in sports, they're fulfilling the expectations society has for them in asserting their masculinity. For women, if you take that construct and apply it to women, women are essentially invading a masculine space, trying to make it their own.
The men's sports are better well known on grounds. There are a lot of student-oriented activities centered around the male sports. So you have like a lot of events centered around football or special days centered around men's basketball.
I think for men to go to a women's sports, it's not like speaking lower of their masculinity, but I think that like it would have to be something major, like something very well known that they're going to, like the #1 team in the ACC. And I think that's maybe like plays a little bit of a role in like why students don't go to the games. They don't think it's like a masculine enough sport, but I'm just speculating.
I think a lot of the answers to the questions regarding what more can be done have to be answered on the part of students.
I think it'll take like an all-around effort on all fronts. It'll take a strong effort in the athletics promotion and marketing department. It'll take a strong effort on the student athletes' part, kind of making connections with their other students and letting them know, like, we want you at our games. It'd be awesome if you could come out and support us, whether it be a male or female sport. And it also takes a lot of effort on the non-student athlete population to say, these athletes are our peers, and we should go out and support them, regardless of their gender, regardless of whether or not their sport is a revenue sport. We should support men's football just as much as we support women's golf or women's softball. There really needs to be kind of like a community built on all fronts, and a lot of effort needs to come from all sides. So I think that's what it's going to take, collective effort.
It's time to get ready to stand up as one and join the Cavalier Marching Band as they carry the Power B to victory. Go, Hoos, go!